The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for this day.
This episode is brought to you by Nature's Bounty. Nature's Bounty believes your body is brilliant, naturally designed to thrive, inside and out. For those always looking for new ways to support your health from head to heels, Nature's Bounty has a range of over 400 vitamins and supplements born from 50 years of trust and care. Nature's Bounty. It's in your nature. Visit naturesbounty.com to learn more.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster and we are in our Regency era. That's right, it's a new series on vulgar history and we're going to be talking about interesting and wild and weird and scandalous people from the Regency era. What the Regency era is technically, it's a time period from 1811 until 1820 when the Prince of Wales became the regent of England because of the illness of his father, George III. But in kind of popular speaking, the Regency era is often extended a bit. So it's kind of like from like the late 18th century right up until when Queen Victoria became monarch in 1837. So what we're talking about is the late 18th century, early 19th century, primarily in England. And as a shorthand to describe this period to people, which I've been doing often lately, I say, well, it's like Bridgerton, and some people know that. And sometimes I say Jane Austen times. People seem to either know Jane Austen times or they seem to know Bridgerton. That's the era that we're talking about. Jane Austen is by far, I think, the best known person from the Regency era. If you go to a Regency event, of which there are many, tea parties and Regency era balls and everything, Jane Austen is very much the inspiration for a lot of those things. And so today we're kicking off this Regency era series by talking about Jane Austen herself. Of all the people I profiled on this podcast, I think Jane Austen might have the biggest and most passionate fan base out of any of them. And so I really wanted to do justice to this iconic writer. And I knew I couldn't do that on my own, and so I have the most fantastic guest with me. It's Dr. Paula Byrne, who is one of the world's leading experts on Jane Austen. She has written 2 nonfiction books about Jane Austen, and she's just published a new novel about Jane Austen. It's called 6 Weeks by the Sea. And I was so grateful Paula joined me to help explain the importance and the influence and the real life story of a woman who a lot of people know her life story, but I think more people know her name or her books than they know what her life was like. And so anyway, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Paula Byrne, and I'm going to pop back at the end with some more updates and some more information. So welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and this is our Regency era series where we're talking about people who lived, the Regency era, the dates are debatable, but roughly the first part of the 1800s in England. And the most famous Regency era person to me is certainly Jane Austen, and that's who we're talking about today. And I'm so happy to have our guest, Paula Byrne, author of several books, including 2 nonfiction books about Jane Austen and a new fiction novel about Jane Austen. Paula, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
I'm so happy you're here. I know Jane Austen has a real devoted fan base, so I want to make sure for this episode that I'm doing everything correctly. I'm portraying this heroine appropriately to the legions of people who adore her. Could you tell me, I'm just curious to know, do you remember when you first read a Jane Austen book, how old you were?
Yeah, I do. I was 14. It's a very funny story, actually, because I was at school and I had, how people say I had this amazing English teacher and they were just incredible and they changed my life. I did not have that. I had the opposite. I had an English teacher who said, I don't believe in you and I don't think you're suitable to do this. So I took myself to night school and when I was 14, and went to school at night, and I read Mansfield Park with an amazing teacher, and that's how I met Jane Austen when I was 14.
Mansfield Park is your first Jane Austen is interesting. I feel like most people, Pride and Prejudice is a lot of people's first entry. So that's interesting. Mansfield Park is one of the least adapted into film, certainly. But so at that point, did you know like, oh, this is for me. I'm going to read all of her other books. I love this writer.
Oh, completely. I was completely hooked. I was 14 and I just thought this is the best thing I've ever read. I mean, I had no idea that she would change my life in the way that she's changed my life. And I would spend the next 20 years writing books about her and talking about her and traveling the world. But I just knew instinctively, intuitively at the age of 14 that I was reading something that was very extraordinary.
I'd like to go through today, and with your assistance, is to just explain, first of all, just sort of who she was as a person. I think Jane Austen is so famous as a brand, as an icon. People know the characters in her books, I think, often more than they know her actual life story. So can you set the scene for her family, where she was born, where they lived?
I mean, the extraordinary thing is for such a genius that she was a very ordinary person. She was a clergyman's daughter living in Hampshire in England. She was not rich. She wasn't poor. So she was sort of middle class, really. You know, I use that term advisedly. And was part of a big family. They were a family of 8. There were 6 brothers, 2 sisters. So they were very intelligent, clever, read a lot. And she had to really fight for her place in the family. You know, she had to be really funny.
And she's one of the younger, right? So it's...
She is.
Yeah, so just fighting for the attention, just...
You're so right. And I think the younger you get in the family, but also when you're in a family of incredibly brilliant and clever people, that's harder.
You said there's brothers and then 2 sisters. And I know she was very close to her sister Cassandra. They were very close in age, weren't they?
Not so close in age. There were 5 years between them. She was very close in age to her 2 brothers, Charles and Frank. So she was sandwiched between 2 brothers. So no, she wasn't close in age to Cassandra, but they were the only 2 sisters in a family of boys.
So inevitably they would get quite close. And that's where I find it really interesting. So clearly, I mean, obviously Jane Austen is known for her writing, but just from what I've been looking up, most of the images that we know for sure that are Jane Austen were drawn by Cassandra. So clearly she was a talented artist. That was where she was drawn creatively. Were they a creative family in general, or was this just a time period where children were encouraged to pursue the arts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Cassandra was a talented artist. I think you're completely right that actually lots of people just drew people in the way that you might nowadays say, I'll take a good photograph. I don't think she was particularly talented as an artist. It's shocking, really, that only 2 sketches of Jane Austen survive by Cassandra. It's also shocking that there are many portraits of her brothers, but not the most talented of the family, who is the daughter, Jane. I don't think Cassandra was talented at all, but I think she was, as many girls were, that's what you did to be accomplished. You just drew something. But Jane Austen was the genius of the family, clearly, of all of these clever, fairly clever, but I would not super talented. But this was this one genius in this family of 8.
In terms of this family, this accomplished family, and Jane herself being such a talented writer, what in the Regency era, where she's growing up in this not, super high class, not poverty stricken, but right in the middle, what sort of education was there for a girl like her at that time?
So she basically was the beneficiary of her father's library. Having said that, she did go to school. She went to boarding school at a very young age, partly to make room for her father's pupils who were also in the rectory. So she went to school a couple of times and then came back a couple of times. But when we talk about education, it was not the education her brothers received. It was a very, very, very different kind of education. And by our standards today, it was very inferior. It was, sent off to, she went to Oxford, she went to Southampton, she went to a few places. But it was more to keep her out of the way than it was to educate her. Her education was really via an incredible library and an amazingly talented family who, I say, not a genius like her, but very talented. So thinking, writing, reading. That, in a way, is the best education of all, surely.
Today, she's very well known as a writer, but and today there's many women are well known as a writer, but for her, at a young age, would she have thought of that as a possibility for something she could do? Was there a role model that she could look at as a woman who was a writer?
Oh, yeah, she was obsessed with Fanny Burney and Maria Edgeworth, and they were writers, female writers who came before her, and she adored their books. So I think they were definitely role models for the kind of writer she wanted to be.
Because novels at this time, just to clarify for everybody, it wasn't poetry was a much more acceptable sort of thing to read or to write, as I understand it, especially for a woman. Novels were more just kind of like, the paperbacks you buy at the drugstore is however people saw all novels. Is that sort of correct?
Pretty much. I mean, there were libraries, circulating libraries were a new thing. So you could pay a subscription and then go to a library. And so lots of women went to libraries and paid their subscription and got lots of books on that basis. There were also a lot of women novelist writers in the 19th century. So she was the beneficiary of women writers saying, we want to make novels our own. This is a genre that actually we're good at because we're letter writers. We write letters to our sisters, we write letters to our cousins, we write letters to our brothers. And the novel begins with the epistolary tradition, which is letters. So for women, they were just like, well, I write letters every day. Hey, I can write letters in novels. And that's how the first novels began. And then new novels were like taking it one step further. But what Jane Austen does, take it to an even greater step.
Well, and that's, I think, a good point to talk about. Do we know, like her juvenilia, as it's called, has been published, the writings that she did as a young person. So what sorts of things did she start writing when she really started taking this seriously?
Well, she didn't take it seriously when she was young because what was really funny about that was she did the opposite. She took on these great giants of literature like Samuel Richardson and all of these amazing male writers, Samuel Fielding. And so she took on these giants of the novel form who were mainly male. And she just parodied them and satirized them. And she knew at the age of 11 or 12 she was better than them. I really firmly believe that. She absolutely thought Fielding and Richardson, you might think you're great, but I'm greater. I really believe at the age of 12 she thought that. So we should never dismiss her early writings because she is taking on these giants and saying, actually, the way you present women as perfect beings is not realistic. I will write heroines that are flawed and make mistakes and are not beautiful. And that was going against this whole tradition of novel writing, of which men were the main writers of that genre, and saying, Jane Austen saying, it's ridiculous what you're doing. No woman could ever live up to that. It's not realistic. Women are real flesh and blood creatures. And my heroines are not going to be like Samuel Fielding and Richardson. They're going to be different. So she knew from a very early age of 11, 12, she writes these hilarious, hysterical parodies in her juvenilia, where she takes on these giants and says, you're being ridiculous. Women don't think like this. Women don't behave like this. Women don't have to be beautiful. Women don't have to be perfect. So she's always ahead of the game.
And what was her family's, how did they support her in her writing? I think I read that her father was championing her to some extent.
I think they were all championing her, all of them, because I think they knew they had a genius in their midst. So her father bought her first writing desk. He bought her leather notebooks to write her juvenilia in. I mean, that someone who goes to the bother of going into a shop and buying a leather-bound notebook to give to your talented daughter because you actually believe in her, and you bother buying her a writing desk because you believe in her, and then you write to a publisher in 1797 and say, I've got First Impressions, which is the early version of Pride and Prejudice. This is her father. And then her brother Henry, writing to try and get her a book deal. Hugely important, let alone the women who later on, in 1811, when she goes to Chawton, and all the women around her say, we know you're a genius. We're just going to do the baking and do all the boring stuff because actually you're a genius. So yeah, absolutely, 100%. Her family were utterly aware that she was completely brilliant, and they facilitated the circumstances by which she could enable her genius to flourish.
I'm so grateful that that's the family that she was born into in another circumstance. And I'm sure this happened. People with a similar genius who didn't have a family who wouldn't support them, we'd never know about what they did. So she started writing. She was writing these hilarious, as a young girl, these kind of parodies. Then you were saying, so her first version of Pride and Prejudice, First Impressions. So at that point, because of who she was as a young woman, she wouldn't be able to just send that to a publisher herself. So in order to get that published, it had to go through her male relatives. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. And so initially her father sends this First Impressions, i.e. Pride and Prejudice, and it gets returned by post, so it doesn't get anywhere. But the fact is he writes and says, this is like Fanny Burney's Evelina, which is the great novel of its day. It's very similar to this. So her father, George Austen, is trying to say to this publisher, hey, look, this is the new Fanny Burney. Little did he know she would outstrip Fanny Burney in a million ways. But obviously that was declined. But the fact, as you rightly say, that the fact that she had these people behind her was just people. Her father was incredibly intelligent. He went to Oxford. A lot of her brothers went to Oxford. They were really smart. And for them to realize that she's actually better than all of them is quite significant, frankly. It's not just like, oh, let's indulge this little girl's fantasies of being a fun writer. This is, we've got a genius. What do we do with this genius? We have to help this genius. And it sort of flies in the face, really, of, because, Jane Austen's not a Victorian, she's a Georgian. And I think Victorian fathers would not have been quite so quick to have supported Jane Austen as the Georgians were. And it's all power to their elbow. And I think sometimes we view history through a very distorted gaze, a sort of, women were so put down and men were terrible. Well, we have a circumstance here where, no, that's not the case. We've actually got men saying she's amazing. We're going to support her. She needs to be in print. We're going to do everything we can to support her. So I think we need to be very careful about how we view history in terms of like weird gender, polarization.
Yeah, I think that's such a good example. And you said that really well. It's to look at an entire era of history and say, well, all men were like this and all men were like this. It's like, well, no, everybody's living their own specific situation. I was just thinking a few weeks ago, I was doing an episode about Mary Wollstonecraft, who did not have this sort of family support. And that's like, there's a few decades difference between when they were working, but just she also had brothers and the brothers were also educated and she wasn't. So just seeing the difference of two like extraordinary women. And Jane Austen was so fortunate to have the family that she was born into.
That's why I really like your question, because I think your question is so important that you actually raise this question of what was the support. And I think that's a brilliant question because a lot of people don't actually ask that question. And as I say, it's twofold. It's the support of women saying, we'll take on the domestic heavy lifting in order for you to do this. I mean, you've got the men saying, we'll support you. So I think that's just a really interesting and important question that you've raised.
Well, and then I think also, so Jane Austen, she's in this era. Again, when I think about, part of what I'm doing in a series is what was the Regency era really like versus kind of how I've thought about it or how people might understand it. You think about the marriage market, and even in a book like Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, where the mother is so intent on marrying off the daughters. But you haven't even mentioned that yet at all, that her family is putting any pressure on her to get married.
Yeah, and there's no evidence that happened, although when she did accept an offer of marriage in 1802 from Harris Bigwither, who was a friend of her sister, of her female friends, one can't help thinking, oh gosh, she does feel the pressure, actually, that there is a chance to put a roof over her mother's head and her sister's head, and he was rich. And I think for women in that position, it would have been very easy for Jane Austen to have said, yeah, I'll just do this. I'll do this for all the wrong reasons, but it would be the right reasons for my family. And then she changed her mind. And I think this is a really significant moment in any woman's life where they might want to take what might seem to be the easy way of, well, I can just make this easy for myself. I can just absolutely have all the money I want. I can look after my parents forever. I can look after my sister forever. How tempting. And how extraordinary that she says, no, I'm not going to do that because it's not what I want to do. And if you look at all her heroines, they always have that moral center of, yeah, but it's not what I want to do. Not in a selfish way, but just in a way of, can I live with myself? Can I live with myself if I just do this for everybody else? And that's why she is so extraordinary as a writer. And there is nobody else at the time writing novels who ever contemplate those issues of what does it actually mean for a heroine, like Elizabeth Bennet when she turns down not just Mr. Collins, but Mr. Darcy, to say, no, I don't want that. I'm poor and I don't have any money and I have no connections and I have no status. But actually, your proposal's so ungracious. I actually would rather be alone. Who else is doing that? Let me tell you, no one.
And her first published book is, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's Sense and Sensibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was, you were talking before about the novels are sort of epistolary, and then they changed, and part of that was her influence. So, because Sense and Sensibility was first written as an epistolary, her first version of it probably, and then that she changed it. Can you talk about what that was like?
So the first three novels, Northanger Abbey, which was called Susan, Sense and Sensibility was called Eleanor and Marianne, and Pride and Prejudice was First Impressions, were all drafted in the 1790s. So they have a very different feel, for example, to, say, Persuasion in 1816. So they are very much novels before the turn of the century. And Jane Austen grew up with Fanny Burney and Richardson novel of letters, the epistolary, however you want to phrase it. And they were the great novels of the day. And Richardson did extraordinary things in Clarissa with that novel of letters, because he took it from just one person's letters to four people's letters. And it shifted perspective so much. It was so extraordinary and so fabulous. And Jane Austen, because she admired Richardson so much and she loved Sir Charles Grant, she loved all those novels, she started off in that form, which, as I said to you before, when women write letters, it's sort of an easy transition. But at some point, it wasn't working for her. And I don't think she had enough authorial control. I think people like Fielding, and then Richardson later on decided that as an author, I want more control. So Jane Austen ditched those early novel of letters, if you like, and decided, actually, this isn't working for me. The novel's moving in it's a new genre. It's moving in really interesting directions. But actually, the novel in letters isn't working for me anymore, because you're only going to get the perspective of the person writing the letters. You don't have the omniscient author that is controlling the narrative. And I think Jane Austen wants to control the narrative. So I think she ditched that. So she had the plot line, she had the characters, she had all of that, but she just thought, no, I'm not really getting control of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift it to third person narration. But then she does extraordinary things with, free and direct speech. So she sort of revolutionized the form. But I think, so going back to your question, Eleanor and Marianne would have just been letters between the two sisters. First Impressions would have been letters between the two sisters. That was and she's one of two sisters. And she wrote lots of letters to her sisters. So it's an easy form. It's familiar, not easy, but it's familiar. So, but then at some point, you can really see her thinking, no, I'm not getting what I need from this method. I have to change the method. I've got to do something that is really different. So then she takes the basis of those novels and she changes them in the early 19th century, in the early 1800s, when she's finally got a roof over her head. The other women are taking on the heavy loading and the housework, and she's finally able to go back to those 1790s novels and do something different with them.
And so Sense and Sensibility, when you may have heard of HelloFresh, you may have even heard me talking about them before, because I love a food box delivery. I'm a person who lives by myself, and maybe you live with other people. I'm sure it's great for you too, but what I can say for myself is the cost of groceries right now is kind of bananas. And if I want to cook a recipe for myself, it's like, I don't want to buy a whole container of this spice and that spice and like a whole cauliflower or whatever. It's like, I just need the amounts of the ingredients I need to make a meal for one. That is me. And you can get that with HelloFresh. Well, technically the meals are for two. So that's like a meal and a lunch the next day. They are the #1 meal kit in America, making home cooking easier with chef-crafted recipes and fresh ingredients delivered straight to your door. This fall, they're serving up even more to love. This isn't the HelloFresh you remember, if you remember them from before. It is bigger. They've doubled their menu. There's more than 100 options each week if you're a picky eater like myself, including new seasonal dishes and recipes from around the world, international recipes, if you will. Healthier options. There's high protein recipes. I know we're all trying to up our protein goals. It's challenging, right? But also, as I know, and maybe you do too, if you're eating more protein, you need more fiber, which is why they also help you. You can eat greener with veggie-packed recipes with 2 or more veggies per dish. The recipes are, guess what, also tastier. So, as I said before, I love a food box delivery. HelloFresh is doing the thing. It's honestly saving me, helping me. I don't live near a grocery store either. That helps me out as well. It's a great product. I eat these meals myself, and you should too. The best way to cook just got better. Go to hellofresh.com/vulgarhistory10fm now to get 10 free meals and a free breakfast for life. 1 per box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. That's hellofresh.com/vulgarhistory10fm, and that's 10fm, to get 10 free meals and free breakfast for life.
The holidays are approaching, and everyone knows that this time of year, the sooner you can get things done, the better. For both shoppers and businesses, the best time to score great deals during the holidays is during that Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend. And if you have your own business, whether you've been around the block a few times or this is your first year going through the holiday sale rush, the most important thing you can have is a platform that can handle everything that's about to be thrown at you. This is a crucial time for your business and your customers. And with Shopify, you can be sure that your tools and platform are ready for anything that comes your way. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names to entrepreneurs who will be participating in their first Black Friday, Cyber Monday this year. With everything else going on, you probably don't have time to spend hours poring over every little detail in your online store. That's why Shopify's thousands of templates and tools help you streamline website creation and make sure that your site isn't just aesthetically pleasing, but functional and easy to use. Shopify's expedited checkout, Shop Pay, saves customer information and reduces hassle. And the best part is that it's been proven to boost conversions, meaning you'll see less abandoned carts and more profits. You can also stress less knowing that Shopify's award-winning customer support team is on standby 24/7 to help with any issues that arise, allowing you to get back to your business as fast as possible. This Black Friday, join the thousands of new entrepreneurs hearing for the first time with Shopify. Sign up for your free trial today at shopify.com/realm. That's shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm and make this Black Friday one to remember.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso. Gift magical mornings with Nespresso Virtuo Pop. Compact and stylish, Virtuo Pop is made to meet every morning coffee craving. From espresso to coffee, hot or iced, at the click of a button. And celebrate the season with Nespresso's limited edition coffee flavors. Sweet almond and hibiscus, cinnamon and candied tamarind, and festive double espresso. Magic in the making. Shop the holiday gift collection exclusively at Nespresso.com.
As a contractor, I don't pay for materials I don't use. So why would I pay for stuff I don't need in my mobile plan? That's why my Biz plan from Verizon Business is so perfect. Now I can choose exactly what I want, and I only pay for what I need.
Right now, with my Biz plan, get our best price, as low as $25 a line. Visit Verizon.com/business to get started today. New lines only. Price per month with 5+ lines. Includes autopay and paper-free billing and promotional discount. Taxes, fees, economic adjustment charge. Applicable add-ons, prices, and terms apply. Guarantee applies to base monthly rate and stated discounts only. Add-on prices additional. Offers in January 5th, 2026.
When it's first published, how is it received? Because it's published. None of her books in her lifetime were published under her name. It's just by a lady. But how was this book received when it came out?
Fairly well received, not like Pride and Prejudice, which was like incredibly well received. It was with Edgerton's Military Library, so it wasn't a great publisher. It was a military library. It was not what I don't think he'd ever edited and ever published a novel before, but she was so desperate to be published. She had such faith in herself, such belief in herself that she did. So perfectly respectable reviews. Did it blow the world away? No. But Pride and Prejudice did.
And I presume that was the second book.
So that was the second book. So Sense and Sensibility in 1811, Pride and Prejudice in 1813. And that was just sell out. And it was the most talked about novel. Sheridan, who's the Richard Brinsley Sheridan, the greatest novelist dramatist of his day, said it was the greatest novel. He just thought this was the cleverest novel he'd ever read. And it was almost word of mouth that it sold really well and people were talking about it. It was the novel du jour. Like everyone was like, oh, Pride and Prejudice. So Sense and Sensibility, respected. Pride and Prejudice, like, wow, there's a new voice here.
And how many, well, I don't mean what's the specific number, but it was published as a lady, but I know that some people knew the author was Jane Austen. And how did people find out her identity?
That came much later, really. So much later on, I think after Mansfield Park, Jane Austen writes about, people are sort of saying, is it me? And then she says, I write only for fame. And she makes jokes about this and says, why not? Why not let people know about me? Because it's still the case that women... What's really interesting, if you think of the Brontes, they pretended to be men. Or they had androgynous names like Cora Acton and Ellis Bell. So in Victorian times and George Eliot, it was like you have to be a male. And that's much later. And in Georgian society, I think it's pretty cool, even by our standards, to say by a lady. It still wasn't saying, hey, I'm George Eliot, or I'm Cora Bell, or I'm Acton Bell. So I think in Georgian times, even to say I'm a lady is pretty cool. It's like saying I'm not ashamed to be a lady. And then from after Sense and Sensibility, she says by the author of. So she'd built up a fan base enough that she could then say, I'm the author of. She no longer has to say, I'm a lady. So it's really interesting to me that actually say, it's limited feminism in proto-feminism in a way, but I think it's still pretty cool that women are like, it's by a lady. I know you don't have to have my name, but I'm still a lady, I'm not a man,
No, I love that. So people could read it. They know, well, I don't know who this is, but it's a lady. And there's something cool about that. And especially, you were saying novels were so popular among women. So for women to read a book by a lady, I think is interesting. But one person who did...
Exactly. You make such a good point that I think for a lot of women borrow novels and buy novels on the whole, as they do today. It's a female genre. So I think by a lady is quite good marketing.
I was just thinking one person who did know her identity was the future George IV, the Prince Regent, who was a big fan of hers. He had a copy of each of Jane Austen's novels in all of his homes. His daughter, Princess Charlotte, was also a big fan of Jane Austen. Can you talk about how Jane Austen felt about the Prince Regent?
Well, she didn't like him, and she didn't like the way he treated the Princess of Wales. And she went, pretty much on record, when I say on record, just in her letters, but very firmly to say, she did not like his behaviour towards his wife. And she was not at all happy that he was a fan and that he wanted her to dedicate Emma to her. And again, she tried to wriggle out of it by saying, I don't think this is the right thing. And then James Stanier Clark, the Prince of Regent's librarian, said, oh, no, you must, it's a wonderful letter because Jane Austen's sort of saying, do I need to do this? Like, how much pressure is there? And he's like, no, you have to do this. Like, this is an honour. And you can sort of feel her trying to wriggle out of this. It's hilarious. But that, the Prince Regent is like, this is an honour, don't you dare. And then she just moved to John Murray, who was Byron's publisher, the most famous publisher of the day. So there would have been pressure from John Murray to say, look, you don't turn this down because you're going to sell copies. That if this is dedicated to the Prince Regent, you're going to sell a lot of copies. So it was a difficult moment for her because she doesn't like him at all. She doesn't like his morals. She doesn't like the way he treated his wife. She's a proto-feminist. But at the same time, she's got pressure from her publishers to say, this is an honour. So I see her wrestling with both sides of the problem, really.
And I believe during this time period, the Prince of Wales librarian was meeting with Jane Austen and suggesting stories that maybe she should write, giving her ideas of the sorts of books that she should write. And then she wrote, I was just reading about this, sort of I don't know if it was a letter or something else, but she sort of wrote a parody of the sorts of things that they wanted her to write. Can you explain that?
Yeah, plan of a novel. So, she gets this librarian, James Stanley Clark, saying, oh, you should do this and you should do that and you should write this story. And she's just completely brilliant because she says, I would hang myself if I wrote a romantic novel. She says, that's not, I must go on in my own way or not at all. And it's just this beautiful example of someone who's slightly being bullied to write in a particular way, but she's absolutely firm in not allowing that to happen and saying, no, I'm going to write in my own way. It may not be for everyone's way, but it's absolutely my way. And it's just testament to her absolute strength of character. And as I say, belief in her own genius, that no man's going to come along and say, can you write this romance about the Saxe-Coburgs? And she's absolutely not going to do it. She's like, no, I'd rather be hanged. She makes this really funny joke and says, I'd rather be hanged than write that kind of novel. But it's, for a woman in the Georgian era, despite what I said about the relative freedoms, she's not Victorian, it's still very extraordinary that she really stands up for the kind of novels she wants to write. And I think we all should be in complete awe of Jane Austen for the way that she says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to write in that way. I'm not going to be bullied into writing what you think I should write. I am going to write in my own, and it may not be to your taste, and it may not be a lot of people's taste, but it's to my taste. And here we are 250 years later, reading her.
Well, actually, yeah, I know that's part of why I'm excited to be doing this episode, is that it is the 250th anniversary of her birth coming up in December, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's been so much discussion. I was just thinking, who else has been so celebrated so consistently? And the books, I believe, have always been in print for 250 years. It's just remarkable. And the way you're talking about, she was obviously a genius, but she was just a normal person, not raised in any way different from anybody else. Just her genius, just the timelessness of it, I guess, is what I'm saying. It just impresses me that people still feel this connection to her.
Oh, for sure. She's second to Shakespeare. And the first critics in the Victorian era, later after she died, were the ones who said, she's second to Shakespeare. Shakespeare is extraordinary and genius, but Jane Austen's second. And I think she still holds that reputation because every generation makes her into their image. So she can be feminist Jane, she can be Marxist Jane, she can be romantic Jane, she can be historical Jane, in the same way that Shakespeare does. She just seems to there's a universality about her that is completely different to most people. Like, will we be reading, I don't know, J.K. Rowling in 100 years? Probably not, but we're still reading Jane Austen after 250 years. And I probably think we'll still be reading her in the same way. I think we'll be reading Shakespeare. I hope we're reading Shakespeare too. So there's something very universal about the way that she writes. That is it, and she's so pared back. She writes about people we feel, oh, I know that person.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that human emotion. I feel that way. I know what it's terrible to be in love with someone who doesn't love you back. And that is just heartbreaking. She's there's such a universality about the way that she writes that I think will endure.
And that's so interesting to think about Jane Austen and in her life, her short life, and we'll get to the end of her life shortly, but she never traveled outside of the UK. Like, she never, her sphere of knowledge was the people who she saw, the letters she wrote to her sister, just the people so it just shows that she's such a keen observer of humanity to be able to write these stories that feel so universal, that feel so timeless, when her personal life was quite small in that way. Maybe someone goes to university and they meet so many new people and then they sort of blossom and then they sort of understand humanity. But she understood it from such a young age.
And I think that's why she's like Shakespeare, because Shakespeare didn't go abroad. And Shakespeare led a very humble life. And she's the only genius we can compare her to. I think when you have a genius like that, the world is inside their head. You don't need to go abroad. You don't need to have all these experiences. I mean, she didn't get married. She didn't have children. For many people at the time would be, the basic of fundamentals of human experience. But she had such a knowledge of what it felt like to be heartbroken, to be in love, to be a daughter, to be powerless, to be a friend to another person, to not know you're in love with someone because they're your friend. You just don't know. You just think they're my friend. And then you suddenly think, oh my God, I'm in love with them. All these things that are very universal that many of us now say, oh, they are the real things that matter. They are the things that actually who you marry, who you connect with. Do you get on with your in-laws? Do you get on with your families? These seem to me to be deeply important questions.
Well, and that connects really beautifully to the novel that you have just published. Because one of the questions that you're answering this novel is one that I think you've said people have asked you. Surely Jane Austen must have fallen in love. How could she write these stories if she hadn't had a love story of her own? But she didn't marry. And so what your novel is looking at is imagining perhaps what that might have looked like. Can you explain the premise of the novel?
Oh, for sure. So I think two issues here. That one, when I've done lots of talks on Jane Austen over the years, people have said to me, did she fall in love? And I sort of slightly dismissed that. I thought, oh, come on, she's an amazing writer. Do we have to go there? Are we still there? And then sort of thinking, well, actually, that is a good question. That's bad on me. And then reading Virginia Woolf when I was thinking about persuasion. And Virginia Woolf says, if you read Persuasion, you know that Jane Austen must have had a heartbroken. You cannot read Persuasion and think that this person has not fallen in love. So I revisited those two things. Did she fall in love? Was she heartbroken? Went back to that story that her sister told many years after Jane's death, when Cassandra said she did fall in love and he was worthy of her. And it was a very sad story, but he was the only man worthy of my sister. And so I went back to that story because I think it is an important, I've dismissed that wrongly, but I thought it is important actually because she does write beautiful love stories and she must have known. It's just inconceivable that she's written these beautiful novels about what it is to fall in love and never known what that felt like. So I just went back to that and thought, let's give Jane Austen her 6 weeks by the sea. And her sister said it was by the seaside, 1801, probably. And she met this incredibly handsome, amiable man. And I just thought, let's just give her her 6 weeks of joy, like her 6 weeks of falling in love. And it didn't work out, but it enabled her to become the writer that she became. So in a way, it did work out. And that was the premise of the book.
And that's the title of the book, 6 Weeks by the Sea.
And that's a quotation from Sanditon, when she talks about 6 weeks by the sea is the very thing. So I just thought, let's give her her 6 weeks by the sea that she wrote about in Sanditon. Let's just see what she was like when she was 25. And I don't think her sister would lie about this, and her niece who told the story. There's no reason after all these years to invent this story, So what would that feel like? What would the man be like? What was it like to be Jane Austen at the height of her powers, but not yet published, but at her most beautiful and sexy? And also she's by the seaside. She loves the seaside. And she meets this man. So it was just so much fun. It was my homage really to Jane Austen on her 250th birthday. Let me just give you your 6 weeks by the sea to fall in love. Like, let's just give you that. Thank you, Virginia Woolf, because she gave me the idea. But I was like, thank you. But let's just try and see whether I can enter inside the heart and mind of this woman that I've spent 20 years thinking and writing about. And let me just see if I really understand how you work and how you tick. So that was the impetus for writing it.
And so Jane Austen's life, her books are published. Each one, presumably, is getting, more and more readers or fans of her are enjoying her work. Like, oh, the new book by a lady. Everyone's excited about it. But she gets ill. Do you know what what the illness was that eventually she had?
It was probably cancer of some sort, possibly like a blood cancer. We don't know. People thought it was Addison's, but now we're thinking it probably wasn't Addison's, which is the thing that JFK had, adrenal gland problem. But I think it was more likely some kind of blood cancer or leukemia, and a painful, protracted death. But she was still writing up until until the day she died, which is testament to what her real love was, which was to write. And to me, it's ineffably sad because a lot of her siblings lived, two of her brothers lived in their 90s. Her sister lived until her late 70s. There was longevity in the family. They were not a family that died young. And you just think she was the most gifted of all of these clever children, and yet she's the one who dies at 41. It's rather devastating.
And after her death, at what point did her literary legacy just continue on this kind of upward momentum that it had been developing during her life? When she died, did it lose momentum, and how did people discover her again?
It did. So it lost momentum, and she did go out of print. And then in the 1830s, there was a man called Benson who decided that he would publish books in one volume rather than 3 volumes that were expensive to produce, and you also had to get them bound. So it was expensive. And so he got the copyright from Jane Austen's family, and he put the books into 1 volume, which was relatively cheap. And so there's a slow rise then that, people are reading her again. There's also academics are saying she's amazing, she's brilliant, she's doing something like Shakespeare did. Now you've got these twofold things of like cheaper books, more accessibility, greater print runs, explosion in the print culture. And then you've also got academics saying, oh my God, she's really amazing. So you've got these two things. And then in 1870, the first memoir is written about her because her eldest brother's about to die. He's in his 90s. And they say, oh, goodness, Aunt Jane suddenly become really popular again. We need to really think about her legacy. So you've got those two things. So then suddenly she becomes really popular again.
The one burning question that I will ask is, if anyone's listening who has not read anything by Jane Austen, what do you suggest they start with?
Honestly, I do think I'm a bit of a believer in chronology. I'm like, start with Sense and Sensibility, start with the way they were published, because that's how she wanted it to be presented to the world. So for my mind, I think, don't start with I started with Mansfield Park, probably don't start with Mansfield Park because it's quite challenging. Just start with the way they were published, because you'll get closer to an idea of what she wanted the world to read about. So start with the two sisters, Marianne and Eleanor, and then the two sisters in Pride and Prejudice, and then the two sisters of Mansfield. Like, two sisters are obviously a massive theme because she had this beloved sister. So I would say just start with the way so start with Sense and Sensibility or Pride and Prejudice, either or. The other challenging ones can come later. So I would say 100% just do with what she wanted us to do, which is like, this is where I published these novels in this order. You could do a lot worse than starting and taking her advice on what she wanted to put out to the world.
Well, thank you so much, Paula. It's been wonderful chatting with you today.
Oh, and you've been amazing, and your questions have been incredible. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Take care. So Paula's novel, again, as we mentioned, it's called 6 Weeks by the Sea, and that's available wherever you get your books from. And what I think is also notable, she mentioned in the podcast that there's only two drawings of Jane Austen done by her sister Cassandra. And one of them is a drawing of Jane Austen at the sea, and that's actually the image that features on at least the North American cover of 6 Weeks by the Sea, which you should be able to pick up wherever. And you can learn more about Paula from her website, which is paulabyrne.com. And so the reason why we're doing this Regency era season is at least partly because I also wrote a book. It's called Rebel of the Regency, the scandalous saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's uncrowned queen, who we mentioned briefly in this episode as well. Jane Austen supported her. Jane Austen did not like her husband. And so for all these Regency era episodes, I want to do a little a little segment I'll call Caroline's Corner, which is how does the person we're talking about connect with Caroline of Brunswick, the heroine of my book that's coming out in February. And very directly, actually, as Paula mentioned. So Jane Austen wrote in a letter about Caroline of Brunswick. She said, quote, "Poor woman, I support her as long as I can because she is a woman and because I hate her husband." And Jane Austen's letters, a lot of them were destroyed by her sister Cassandra after she died. And potentially, most likely, that's because it was like if one of us died and someone was just like, could you delete my like DMs off my phone? Could you delete my Twitter account? I don't know, like my emails, like, because Jane Austen's letters to her sister were very, like she liked to make jokes, she liked being silly, and some of it, I think her sister knew if it was read later on, like would be seen as disrespectful, especially to people in their social circle or in their family. So a lot of them were destroyed, but luckily not the one in which Jane Austen says, and I'll read it again because it's a fantastic quote, "Poor woman, I support her as long as I can because she is a woman and because I hate her husband." And if you want to know who Caroline of Brunswick was and why Jane Austen felt this way and supported her so strongly, you can pre-order my book, Rebel of the Regency, The Scandal Saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's Uncrowned Queen, which will be available in February. You can get more information about my book at rebeloftheregency.com. And so another thing that we do on this podcast, when I remember to, is that we score the people we're talking about in 4 different categories, which is just sort of a nice way to wrap up a discussion, but also a way to sort of to see how everybody compares in these completely like random categories that I chose. And so the first, I want to score Jane Austen. And the first category that we score everybody on this podcast is scandaliciousness. How scandalous was Jane seen by people of her place and time? Like, was she a scandalous person in her time? And I would say no. I would say her family, things that perhaps someone might have thought was scandalous about her, like the fact she didn't get married or the fact she accepted a marriage proposal and then turned it down. Like her family was there for her. Like they were not scandalized by her. It seems like, as far as I can tell, society was not really scandalized by her. Not everybody knew that she was writing these books, but even if they did, it's only a moderate amount of scandal. Like there's not nothing, but there's such a small amount. I'm just going to give her a 1 out of 10 for scandaliciousness. The next category is scheminess. And so for somebody else, for some sort of, queen in medieval times, we might be like, oh, this person was scheming to invade this other country or whatever. For Jane Austen, the scheminess, I think, is more just like being able to come up with books and find ways to get them published and stuff. And even that, I feel like there's definitely some scheminess there in her looking at what books were out there and what were they like. And like sort of like Paula was describing, Jane Austen was really sort of like coming up with new ways to tell stories and things like that. Even getting her books published, her family was there supporting her. It wasn't Jane Austen and her it wasn't just her tenacity and ambition that eventually got them published. It was people were there helping her. So I don't think she needed to be really schemy because people were there helping her. But there was certainly ambition, drive, cleverness. When you balance it all out, I'm going to give her a 7 for scheminess. Significance is absolutely a 10, like Paula was saying. Jane Austen is second only, I don't know, I would say maybe first. Her and Shakespeare are up there in terms of just like people whose body of work are just so respected and seen as so brilliant and so genius. And even people who aren't big readers, people who don't know or don't care to know about history or literature, like, the name Shakespeare, like, and I think the name Jane Austen. And the fact that it's her 250th anniversary and we're celebrating her right now. Actually, I want to mention too, there's a statue of Jane Austen that just went up. And unlike the statue of Mary Wollstonecraft that went up a few years ago, she's fully clothed and it looks like her. So just a sec. The Jane Austen statue is at Winchester Cathedral. And this is also where Jane Austen was buried. So Jane Austen was buried in Winchester Cathedral. She actually died in Winchester in 1817. So having this statue there, I think it makes sort of, if you're going for a Jane Austen pilgrimage, go to Winchester Cathedral. You can see the statue, which again is fully clothed, unlike the Mary Wollstonecraft statue. And then you can also visit her grave inside of the castle. I'm just looking at Winchester Cathedral is announcing, because of the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth, which is coming up in December. So they describe her just in terms of the 10 out of 10 for significance. Jane Austen is Britain's greatest female novelist. Her novels, published in over 40 languages, have been adapted for the widest possible audience across all cultural media. Her profile is global. Pride and Prejudice alone has sold more than 20 million copies, having never been out of print. There's going to be a special service at the cathedral, theater performances, tours, lots of stuff happening all this year, celebrating the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen. And it's really, I'm happy to see all of this. Full stop, comma, and semicolon. I'm especially happy because there's been so many people we've profiled on this podcast who don't get celebrated to this extent. And I'm just really happy when somebody actually is, when a woman from history is recognized to this extent. The fourth and final category that we score people on this podcast is the sexism bonus, by which I mean, how much did sexism hold this person back? How much more might they have been able to accomplish without it? And for Jane Austen, I don't think sexism did hold her back that much. Like, she could have gotten a better education in school if she had been a boy, but she made up for that by reading the books at home from what her father taught her and stuff. Like, it didn't really get in her way from becoming this extremely significant, greatest, best-sellingest female novelist of all time. And, you know, in a different context, with a different family, in a different financial situation, maybe she would have had to have gotten married for money, and then maybe she wouldn't have been able to write, but that didn't happen. Like, that would be a higher score for sexism. So I don't think sexism affected her. I mean, obviously it did, but not to the detriment. Like, obviously she wrote all these books and she did just fine. So that gives her a total scandaliciousness score. Again, the highest possible score would be 40, and she has got a score of 22. And just to give you some perspective on where, if you want to see all the scores, go to vulgarhistory.com, and there's a thing there that's like scores, and then you can see the scores that everybody got. So she's here with a 22. Interestingly, we usually talk about women on this podcast. Sometimes we talk about men. One of the men we talked about was Christopher Marlowe, who is Shakespeare's kind of rival. He's got a 22.5. So two English writers are there together. The French writer Manon Roland is also here with a 22. She lived during the French Revolution. We talked about her during the French Revolution season. So that's what Jane Austen is. 22 out of 40 on the scandaliciousness scale. So we're going to be in this Regency era for a while, like at least until February or March, because my book comes out in February. rebeloftheregency.com is where you can pre-order the book and learn more about it. And also, if and when you do pre-order the book, which you could also get as an audiobook, of which I will be reading part of it, if you send me the receipt from having done that, then I will give you some treats, like a Carolina of Brunswick paper doll sheet, as well as a free membership to my Patreon and or to my Substack newsletter, where I'm also writing about people from the Regency era, because I think it's an era, you know, when I mentioned like Bridgerton, Jane Austen, like I think a visual might come to mind of like, oh, people at a ball, like here's what's happening. It was actually a wild time. And this actually comes up quite a bit in Paula's novel, 6 Weeks by the Sea, which is about what if Jane Austen fell in love, but it also delves into things that were happening at the time, like the fight for the abolition of slavery. What was the situation like for mixed race people in England at the time? There's a lot of societal issues going on. They got quite close to a French Revolution type moment. The Regency era was lit, is what I'm saying. Fit check for our Regency era is going to be maybe the tagline for this season. Anyway, next week, we're talking about another icon of the Regency era, and I'm excited for you to hear that conversation and join the conversation. I'm on social media at Vulgar History Pod on most of the places. And also Patreon has been doing more stuff where like you can join for free and just follow along and see my updates. And I've been posting there a lot. I'm at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. And anyway, until next time, my friends, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is researched, scripted, and hosted by Ann Foster. That's me. Editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. Transcripts of this podcast are available at vulgarhistory.com by Aveline Malik. You can get early, ad-free episodes of Vulgar History by becoming a paid member of our Patreon for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. Vulgar History merchandise is available at vulgarhistory.com/store for Americans, and for everyone else at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. Follow us on social media at Vulgar History Pod and get in touch with me via email at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com.
If we knew more about our sleep, what would we do differently? Would we go to bed at a consistent time or take steps to reduce interruptions to our sleep? With the all-new Sleep Score, Apple Watch measures your bedtime consistency, interruptions, and sleep duration. Then, every morning it combines these factors into an easy-to-understand score from 1 to 100. So you'll know how to take the quality of your sleep from good to excellent. Introducing the new Sleep Score on Apple Watch. iPhone 11 or later required.
You know the words that dominate our news cycle.
Private equity keeps inventing
generative artificial intelligence.
Tax on home.
America's chip fueled by market volatility.
Bets on Fed rate cuts.
But do you truly understand how they impact your world and your wallet? In a world that skims the what, understand the why. Because context changes everything. Subscribe to learn more at Bloomberg.com, the global benchmark for business news.
Introducing Taking Share, Lessons from Leaders with Rob Holmes, Chairman, President, and CEO of Texas Capital. During each episode, you will hear from leaders, decision makers, and culture shapers across industries. What drives them? What tips the scales when making tough calls? How do they continue to evolve? We're here to understand the thoughts behind their actions and discover how they are taking share. For more information on Texas Capital, please visit us at our website.